right. Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everybody. This is exciting. This event has been in the making for over a year. And so it's very exciting to be kicking this off. And so, as Michelle said, my name is Christine Kuglin, and I am honored to serve as one of the conference co-chairs. And on behalf of the University of Denver and the Truth in Accounting program at the university, we want to thank you for joining us. This marks our third GovFin conference since the passage of the Financial Data Transparency Act in 2022. You heard about that if you're in the pre-session. This was a landmark piece of legislation that continues to transform how government financial information is reported, accessed, and understood. And while we had originally hoped to welcome you in person at the beautiful University of Denver campus, the economic challenges facing both universities and governmental entities led us to shift to a virtual format. This decision has allowed us to offer a broader access and affordability for those of you attending, ensuring that these important conversations are available to more people across the country. We do hope that you'll visit us in Denver in the future, and we'd love to welcome you to our campus. Before I hand things back to Michelle, I want to thank Truth in Accounting for being one of our sponsors, and Michelle will be thanking some of the other sponsors, and she'll provide you with more information about the main conference event. And I also want to take this moment to share just a bit of exciting news. I'm thrilled to announce that my colleagues, Michelle Savage, Stephanie Leiser, and Natalie Fitzpatrick from the University of Michigan, along with myself, have been selected for the 2024-2025 Association of Government Accountants Authors Award for our article, Digital Data Standards, which was published in the Journal of Government Financial Management. This prestigious award is presented annually by the AGA to recognize the most outstanding article published in the journal from the previous year. Selected by the journal's editorial board, it honors work that significantly contributes to advancing government financial management. This recognition underscores AGA's commitment to research, transparency, and accountability. And that is the very spirit of this GovFin conference, as it has been for the previous two conferences. So on behalf of my co-authors and myself, we are grateful to the AGA for recognizing the importance of this effort, the effort we've been maintaining for the last 3 years to get the FDTA implemented. So over the next 2 days, we've prepared an engaging lineup of exceptional speakers, timely topics, and practical insights designed to support the effort that all of you are engaging in to make the FDTA. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Savage, who will thank our remaining sponsors and walk us through what you can expect throughout this conference.
Thanks very much, Christine. And yeah, I think the AGA article is important, and the fact, we're obviously very proud of the article, but the fact that the AGA has chosen this topic as, one of the most important of the year is really heartening to me, because, data standards are really all about efficiency, about improving the way that that any kind of reporting entity can prepare and submit information. So, we're very excited to have all of you with us today. As Christine said, we have a great lineup of speakers, and this is our third annual conference. And the reason that we've been doing this for 3 years now is because we want to get education out there. We want to, we still don't have a final Financial Data Transparency Act rule, but we know that it is rolling out. And so we want to provide as much information as we can about the process that regulators and standard setters and supporting entities like accountants and software companies are doing to help governments get ready. And because we do know that this is going to happen. And the FDTA is a really important milestone in government reporting because it covers all FSOC agencies, and the focus of our session is really on the state and local government reporting piece of that, to improve efficiency, to improve transparency. And, implementing data standards, open data standards is a proven approach to increasing efficiency in reporting. We see that in government, we see that in business. We see programs like Standard Business Reporting, which is actually named to the FDTA as an important initiative. Standard Business Reporting is something that's been effectively implemented in Australia, in the Netherlands. It's now being expanded across the Nordic countries, so that the whole set of 5 different countries will be working in concert on a standard business reporting program to improve efficiencies for businesses and for government agencies. And I also want to mention that, we see data standardization as a way to really boosting the effectiveness of artificial intelligence. We all know that AI is here to stay. It is changing our world in so many different ways. And we see 2 things. We see, XBRL data serving as, or structured machine readable data serving as an important resource for AI algorithms. And we've actually done some research ourselves to show how much better AI results can be when used with structured data. And we also see artificial intelligence as something that's going to make it easier to prepare financial data in structured machine readable format. And for those of you who attended the workshop this morning, you actually saw one of the tools that is kind of given a boost by artificial intelligence. And so there are lots of ways that we want to leverage AI and provide data that's going to make AI a little bit better moving forward. So we'll have more information about that in the coming months. Our first session is going to be introduced by Mark Jaffe. Mark is the founder of the Center for Municipal Finance. He is also a visiting fellow at the California Policy Center. And Mark is also a member of our board at XBRL US. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Mark to introduce our first speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm really pleased to introduce Dave Sanchez, who probably doesn't need much of an introduction to most of you. As you know, Dave is the director of the Office of Municipal Securities at the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. He has over 30 years of experience in all aspects of the municipal finance market. In prior service to the SEC, he was a principal drafter of both the final Municipal Advisor Rule and the 2012 Commission Report on the State of the Municipal Securities Market, a report that I remember reading in great detail as I got myself involved with the municipal securities market. Dave, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. Just a reminder, any of my comments today reflect my views as the director of the Office of Municipal Securities, but do not reflect the views of any of the commissioners or any other staff at the commission. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So industry participants were expecting the first round of FDTA regulations to be finalized at the beginning of 2025, but the release has yet to appear. Is there any news you can share with us today about the status of the regulations?
So, I mean, no news, as you know, we generally do not comment on timing of regulation, but, this is a multi-agency rulemaking. There's 9 agencies, many of which are having changes in leadership. So, kind of the expectation that things might get delayed because of changes at various agencies. But otherwise, what I always tell folks to look at is each agency is required to submit a reg flex agenda. And although those are also estimates, for folks who like to read tea leaves, at least it gives you some tea leaves to read. So.
Oh, great. I'll be reading those tea leaves.
There you go.
Going back to the proposing release from the middle of last year, one controversial aspect was the regulator selection of financial instrument global identifiers, or FIGIs, as the security identifier preferred for regulatory reporting. Based on a reading of the comment letters, it seems like this kicked up a lot of debate, especially from those who support the use of CUSIPs. Can you offer any thoughts about security identifiers in the municipal market?
So again, Mark, it's a little bit difficult to answer. We are in adopting phase, so obviously, all comments are considered with, great intent, and as of now, right, if folks are still commenting, there's still been a trickle of comments coming in. So I think it's, can't really comment on anything in particular with respect to things that were in the proposal and things for which we have comments on. But I do think it's important, and this applies to everything, not the particular data standard that you mentioned, but I think it's an important reminder for everybody with respect to any of the data standards that are adopted as part of the multi-agency rulemaking is that, and this was in the proposing release. It's one of the first paragraphs in the proposing release. Just a reminder that any of the data standards that are adopted by the multi-agency rulemaking will then be independently considered by each agency with respect to the data standards that are under its purview. And then Congress had built in a number of flexibilities with respect to any of these data standards. So one, you can tailor them for small entities. You can tailor them to minimize disruptive changes to the market. And then you can, particularly the SEC, and particularly in the muni market, we can tailor any of the standards as we see fit with respect to that particular market. And then finally, they're not exclusive. So this is another thing that was mentioned in the proposing release, is that to the extent they have the authority, each individual agency can also propose additional data standards in addition to the ones that are identified by the proposing release. And so that's all in the spirit of interoperability. So I think, it's important to remember that, again, with respect to everything in the proposing release and even everything that's ultimately adopted, that once you get into all the phase 2 rulemakings, that there is a lot of flexibility that Congress built into the legislation.
Terrific. With respect to phase 1 and phase 2, so now that phase 1 is taking longer than originally expected, does that mean that phase 2 will be delayed, or will it be possible to catch up?
So, with respect to the phase 2 in the muni market, I think it's important to note that our timeline starts once the multi-agency rule is adopted. So automatically, we do have we don't even have a longer timeline. We have the same timeline, but it is extended. I think, particularly in the muni market, that it's going to be really important to make sure that we hear all comments and make sure that we get this right. So, I think if there had been, I just think it's important that we go through the entire process. But we'll see, part of that depends on what happens in the multi-agency rulemaking, and then how straightforward or not straightforward things might be in the muni market. The one thing I will say is that, we are required to, and we absolutely intend to, engage with market participants a lot. And so one of the positive things about the first round of comment letters that were received on the multi-agency rulemaking is that about 35 to 40% of the comment letters were specifically about the municipal market or were from municipal market participants, which is a way higher percentage than our share of the market. So I think that really clearly signaled to everybody involved that this is of great concern to the municipal market. So I think that was positive. Also, a lot of the comments in the phase 1 rulemaking were really about phase 2 type issues, and that's fine because it really gives us, an early roadmap to what people are thinking about phase 2. Again, comment letters are always considered when they come in. So if people are having additional thoughts about what's in phase 1 or just want to anticipate some of the issues that they might see in phase 2, it's definitely no problem to either write in a formal comment letter or request a meeting. This is something that we have continued to think about during this whole time, and so that engagement with the market, particularly in the municipal securities market, is just going to be really, really crucial. So, for me, the process of starting the phase 2 rulemaking, one, there will obviously, be at least one comment period. But even aside from that, making sure that folks are engaging with us as they see fit is really, really important, and I highly encourage it.
So just to make sure that I'm not inferring something that I shouldn't, from your point of view,
we don't want you to do that.
We don't want to do that, right? From your point of view, is the phase 1 comment period still ongoing until the phase 1 release is finalized, or do you consider that closed at this point?
I think, generally speaking, to the extent folks can consider comments, they always do. This, again, doesn't just apply to FGTA. This is kind of a general policy. So, depending on where the multi-agency rulemaking is, and to me, really, particularly if it's about phase two, sending it in now is not a problem because again, it gives us a really good idea of the issues that people are thinking about for phase two, and kind of helpful in even drafting that initial proposal. If folks are anticipating phase two issues now, it's actually really helpful.
Terrific. So Gatsby recently announced the formation of a consultative group for its voluntary digital financial reporting project, which we'll be hearing about later at GovFin 2025. Do you have any thoughts about the Gatsby project, and do you see it as being relevant to the FDTA?
Yeah, I do think it's relevant. Basically everything that's happening with respect to, how municipal entities present their financial information, how the market is able to ingest that financial information, anything that's happening outside the confines of the rule writing is definitely relevant, and obviously Gatsby particularly relevant to the extent that financial statements are part of the FDTA, and most people expect that to be part of the FDTA process because it is part of the information that is submitted to the MSRB currently. So absolutely, and again, to the extent that kind of big strides are being made with respect to the Gatsby project, or again any other aspect of the way state and local governments report financial information, or the way the market ingests that financial information, that's really relevant for us to hear on a continued basis, and no need to wait to flag this stuff for us, particularly as we continue to think about phase two.
Excellent. I just want to say we have over 100 people listening in, and we are going to have a couple of minutes for participant questions. So if you have a burning question on your mind, please drop it into the Q&A section, and time permitting, we will try to get to some of those. So thanks again to everybody for joining. So Dave, previously you've been critical of technology vendors trying to generate business by scaring potential filers about forthcoming FDTA requirements. Recently, the University of Michigan's Close-Up Unit and DocBond have demonstrated their progress on a free open source solution for filing XBRL ACFRs. Do you see open source technology helping to reduce FDTA compliance costs?
So again, it depends on how well developed it is and how far along it is, but as I said previously, anything that's kind of happening outside the confines of the rule writing is going to be really relevant for us to consider. So that includes, as part of all rule writing, we will have to do an economic analysis. And so one of the issues that has been raised, particularly in the muni market, is cost. And so if there are ways, to address cost issues, again, that's going to be really part of our consideration in part two. It's obviously important to be realistic about how far along those are, how accessible they really are. At the same time, I think the expectation from a lot of folks is that things are happening really quickly in technology and in ways that will affect this ultimate rule writing. And so all of that's going to be relevant as we think about phase two.
Yes, exactly. And if I could just sort of respond myself a little here, I think a lot of us who are supportive of XBRL in the municipal market believed, based on the experience with corporate filing, that the cost of filing would dramatically drop as people became more aware of the technology and as technology improved. And now we're seeing such rapid technology improvement. I'm confident, that what we saw in the demos earlier, costs of $1,500 or less. I think that should really give people confidence that if the SEC decides to implement XBRL for FDTA compliance, that it will not be incredibly costly. But I realize that is my opinion, and you'll be expressing your opinion in the form of proposed and final regulations.
Well, but I mean, more importantly, I expect we'll get a lot of feedback, from different folks who have different experiences, and again, there are things that folks say are happening that can potentially reduce costs. There are things happening that folks think might, obviate the need for uh, specific data standards with respect to specific types of information because other technology changes are happening so quickly that they might, whatever folks were thinking about when this law was passed, by the time we get through phase two, that there might have been an alternative solution that has already presented itself, or at least is on the horizon. So again, it's interesting because this isn't like a stagnant situation. And I think that's the most important thing for us to think about in terms of rule writing. That one, you don't want to this has been mentioned, very early on when the rule passed, is that you want to have sufficient flexibility in the rule that you're not like locking in some outdated technology. But at the same time, we are always very conscious of our mandate from Congress and what Congress has asked us to do. So, those two things we have to always balance.
Great, appreciate it. So turning to a slightly different issue around financial statement reporting timeliness. So in 2014, the Office of Municipal Securities recognized that many municipal issuers were not posting their annual financial disclosures on a timely basis or at all. Under the SEC's Municipal Continuing Disclosure Cooperation Initiatives, many entities caught up with their annual disclosures and 72 were sanctioned. More recently, we've seen a deterioration in financial statement timeliness. As our friends at Truth in Accounting found, 9 states took more than 300 days to issue their FY 2023 ACFR. So if their closing date was June 30th, 2023, it would take them practically till mid 2024 or later to actually produce the 2023 ACFR. So does OMS believe that there is a timeliness issue with financial disclosures? And if so, do you have any thoughts about how to address it?
Well, one, I think I'm curious about what you're talking about deterioration, because I know I've seen some recent reports, but the change in delivery time was not that significant. Like I think it, whatever the average was, the last time they looked was maybe like a day or two more. So maybe deterioration is a little bit of a strong word. I didn't see significant change in the timeliness, although the last report was longer than the one right before it. But I didn't
Right,
see
you're
like,
referring to the investor tools and I think University of Illinois study, correct? And they showed that it had been deteriorating for several years and now it's sort of stabilized. So fair enough.
right, but also
Yeah.
hadn't deteriorated, in my opinion, hadn't deteriorated that much, to the point where deterioration might be a little bit too strong of a word. So just want to be clear about that. So it's interesting because obviously that's something that we've consistently heard about. I think state and local governments have explained, why in many cases it's not possible for them to bring their financial statements faster. And it really can depend on the state and local government and the way they're constituted. So I think, we always have to be conscious of kind of that reality. One thing that I think has been really important and heard a lot from investors is that, other types of information like the focus on, audited financials in particular, can sometimes cause a problem in the sense that there's other information that would be extremely helpful. I don't know, I don't want to say more helpful, but extremely helpful as well, that shouldn't be off the table. So, I think we're always conscious of one, that metric, because it's an easy metric of how fast our audited financials coming in. But I think to be realistic with this market, I think we also have to be conscious of what other types of information would be useful for investors that can, help that issue. And to that point, I mean, we put out a couple of things So in 2020, the Office of Municipal Securities put out a staff legal bulletin, again, reminding folks of how things work with voluntary disclosure, encouraging folks to do voluntary disclosure. Same thing happened just a couple months later, specifically with respect to COVID. I recently gave a speech at the GFOA last month where, again, we reiterated kind of the types of voluntary disclosure that people can give, the types of voluntary disclosure that we've heard investors say they want. And, again, encouraging folks to do that, all to address this kind of timeliness issue. But, I think if you only focus on the audited financials, it doesn't tell the full story. And I think one thing I've learned, sort of being in and out of regulation and in and out of practice, is that we can think about good disclosure for this market more holistically than just focusing on audited financials. Because even like some credits, some deals, depending on the credit, the audited financial is not as relevant as what is happening with that specific credit. So.
Well, to that point, in analyzing states, which I've done a lot of, I found that most of them publish a monthly general fund cash report or even a monthly enterprise-wide cash report. And so, yes, I can download those and analyze them. I find that most of them weren't on Emma when I looked, and now that was back in 2022, so maybe that's changed. So I'm wondering if maybe there's some value to encouraging states to post that on Emma or at least post a link to it. And then, the format is not standard. And then there's always the question of, well, it's an unaudited document. And so is it really something we can rely on? I mean, have you, dealt with issuers that have been producing these monthly or quarterly reports, and what's your experience been with them?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously there are other ways, particularly for voluntary disclosure, and I think that's one issue that, as regulators, and the fact that we designated the MSRB as a repository, the SEC designated the MSRB as a repository for continuing disclosure. So one of the issues there is, are these types of voluntary disclosures, one, is Emma the appropriate place? Two, is the appropriate place, a state's own website. Obviously, some entities use, third-party delivery methods. Some post on their own website. So one, I again would say, obviously there are other places you can look for this information. State and local governments generally have state governments at least generally have their own investor website, whether it's something they host or whether they have a third party host it. So, and then always the question of, how does that interact with sort of the official repository? And is this kind of a best case scenario for investors? So I think that's always something that we're thinking about as well. But, I do think it's important to continue to encourage, again, state, local governments to get this information out, and always open to the feedback of whether it's too complicated for folks to have to go hunting, 3 different places looking for this information, or if there's some way to make that a little more streamlined. So
Terrific. So I've gotten a couple of additional questions over the chat from other panelists, but just a last reminder to people in the audience, if you do want to ask Dave a question, please use the Q&A feature, and we might be able to get to it.
Or if you want to ask Mark a question.
That's true. But I think everyone wants to know what you think, Dave.
Okay.
So one question that came in over chat is, we mentioned the GASB voluntary disclosure initiative previously. Is that something that the SEC is working with GASB on, or are you just watching it like any member of the public?
So, GASB has been doing a good job of keeping us updated on their progress. So, yeah, we are, I guess, it's not the same as passively watching as a member of the public, because they've been doing a really good job of keeping us apprised of how it's moving along. So, very conscious of their progress on it.
Got it. And one thing that I remember talking to you about offline previously was the question of other kinds of municipal disclosure. I mean, you've already referenced that. We've been very focused on these annual financial reports, but there's a lot of other things that that governments and other municipal issuers disclose. So, is this a good time for people who are attending today to sort of raise their hand and suggest other things that should be candidates for FDTA implementation, or should we be waiting for the next cycle?
I think I said earlier, you know what I mean? Like, so not necessarily on this particular webinar, you know, this may not be your best place for an official comment letter, but as I said earlier, you know, please reach out to us. We can have a conversation about it. You know, you can submit a written comment to us. You can submit a written comment to the rule file. But I definitely don't think people need to wait. I think if there's something that's on your mind that you think is a good idea and it's on your mind right now, then send it in to us, or, you know, request a meeting. But there's no need to wait to have these conversations.
Terrific. One thing that occurred to me from watching the news last week, I don't know if you noticed it, but Brightline, Florida missed an interest payment. It's not a default. Their interest rate is going to reset. It was contemplated in the official statement that this could happen, and that there was a method for not paying it and then sort of paying it on the back end by increasing the coupon rate by 2%. But anyway, it's a credit now where there's been a lot of deterioration in the value, and I think a lot of municipal participants are focused on it. There's been coverage in the Bond Buyer and on Bloomberg, as well as on Paul Graves's website, which I'm totally blanking on right now, and so I apologize for that. So it's a credit that's gotten a lot of attention, and it's one of these things. At least in California, Brightline is a private activity bond, and I've noticed that a lot of private activity bonds come from corporates, and those corporates sometimes file standard XBRL financial statements with the SEC, and they're available on EDGAR. So I'm wondering, do you see a problem right now with sort of this sort of two levels of disclosure where there's machine readable data on EDGAR for a particular issuer, but not machine readable data on EMMA, just a traditional PDF? Is that something that you've become aware of? And if so, do you have any thoughts about it?
Well, I mean, anytime you're talking about conduits, like that's been the case for a while, right? And you know, there are obviously very good reasons why the municipal market has operated with a different disclosure regime. But you know, the question of like where conduits fit in the overall disclosure regime is one that, you know, goes back and continues to be of interest. So I guess I would say obviously for sure we're aware of the disparity, right? Because that disparity has existed for a long time. And even going back to what you mentioned at the outset of this webinar, the 2012 report, I mean, one of the things that I thought was significant in the 2012 report for the SEC was, you know, drawing a clear distinction between true governmental bonds and conduit bonds. You know, one in terms of default rates, and then two, I know at that time there were, you know, suggestions from market participants that to the extent there's a disclosure enhancement for the municipal market, that it be concentrated specifically on conduits, right, where there is a private borrower. So, I mean, that's been something that's been on the table for a long time. It's, you know, at least theoretically been on the table for a long time. There's not been any specific legislation proposed on it that I'm aware of. And so it's been more an idea from market participants. Obviously, some folks would be on the other side and say, you know, because it's a conduit, because it's done as municipal security, it should still stay under the municipal regime. And then obviously what's, you know, one of the suggestions, XBRL, I mean, FTTA does not create any new reporting requirements for anybody, right? But so there's, you know, it's not intended to add additional reporting requirements or change timelines or do anything like that. But, you know, to the extent that information would now be required to be submitted in a certain way, then you might see a little more like uniformity between those two markets. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Last question from me then. Uh, does OMS use issuer data? You know, the kinds of data that you see on Emma. If you do use it, do you see any value to you getting machine readable data for your own regulatory purposes?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, I mean, I think it's interesting because for, you know, I think we always have to kind of just be realistic about where the municipal market has been and where it's possible to go. And you know, I think in a perfect world, right, anything that brings uniformity, anything that brings efficiency and faster, like of course, why would this not be a good thing for everybody involved? But at the same time, it's just really important to also be conscious of like what real hurdles are there to actually achieve that, you know, and you know, like so you've raised earlier some things that are happening uh, outside the confines of this rule writing, you know, the open source work, the GASB work, like things that can help kind of achieve this type of uniformity. And so to me, it's important to be one, very conscious of what's happening that can improve, you know, the situation, but also very conscious of like what is realistic of from where we are, and you know the costs and the value of moving forward in different directions. And I think that's just a delicate balance that, you know, um, I kind of look forward to additional conversation about it. I think the issues that have been raised by, you know, by folks on all sides of some of these issues have been really interesting. And again, as technology kind of continues to move along in leaps and bounds, it's going to always be an interesting conversation. So, to me, so I guess to answer the question is like, you know, always looking for ways to improve efficiency, always looking for ways to improve how easy it is to ingest financial information, but at the same time, really important to also be realistic about costs we're imposing on the market, as well as, you know, the bang for the buck, basically. So
Terrific. So I just apologies to Paul again. The his outlet is DebtWire, so Bloomberg, Bondwire, DebtWire. Dave, any final thoughts for our attendees today?
I don't have any other than just, you know, I feel like we say this every time, but just really really encouraging folks to write in or request meetings if they have things on the mind. And I know once we get to phase 2, there we expect a kind of a flurry of outreach, but you know, I don't want people to feel like they have to wait. We're always happy to have these conversations. We're actively thinking about this all the time. And so I just want to really drive home that message that, you know, this is going to be complicated. It's going to be interesting, but that's why you shouldn't feel, that's why if we can have the conversation over a more extended period of time starting now, it's going to be more helpful for everybody. So
Very good, Dave. Thank you so much for your time today, and we'll turn it back over to Michelle. Thanks again.
thank you guys. Bye.
Thanks so much, Mark and Dave. That was really interesting, and actually, I think very helpful to know that you know, we can continue submitting comments in, and I think maybe get kind of a head start on some of the issues that we think are going to be facing the SDC as they're working on a rule for phase 2.